The crash was more than loud. It was final. One moment I was driving, humming some song I can't even remember now, and the next, it was metal folding, glass raining, and a silence that felt like the end of the world. When I woke up, everything hurt. My ribs, my shoulder, even blinking felt like a task. They told me I had multiple fractures and a concussion, but what they didn't tell me, what no scan could pick up, was that something else had broken too. And it wasn't going to heal in a cast. At first, Mark was there. Not every second, but enough. Flowers, lukewarm coffee, those little fruit cups I used to love. He kissed my forehead like I was made of porcelain, and he said all the right things. But then, he started showing up late, or not at all. He was tired, or slammed at work. Always something. I told myself he was just overwhelmed, just scared, just being human. But deep down, I started wondering if maybe he was being something else entirely. And then came the night everything shifted. I remember the nurse, young, sweet, rushed, handing me a phone she thought was mine. I recognized the wallpaper immediately. Mark's lock screen. I was going to call her back, tell her the mistake. But a message popped up before I could press the button. Just one sentence. Can't wait until she's finally home. Or gone. I didn't blink. Didn't breathe. Suddenly, the pain in my ribs was nothing compared to the one in my chest. I stared at that screen for a long time. My hands were shaking, but not from the painkillers. My heart was pounding, but not from the trauma. It was the words. Casual, cruel, intimate in a way that made my stomach twist. That message didn't come from a stranger. It came from someone who wasn't afraid to say what she really felt, because she believed he felt the same. And in that moment, I realized he probably did. I didn't confront him. Not right away. What was I going to say? That I found his secret life on accident, thanks to a nurse who mixed up two identical phones? That while I was lying here pieced together with wires and bandages, he was unraveling us with someone else? No. I just lay there, quiet, letting the pieces settle. I needed to be smart now, clear, strong. The kind of strong that doesn't yell, the kind that waits. The next time he visited, he didn't even notice the difference. He talked, distracted, scrolling through his backup phone like nothing had happened. Told me he might miss the weekend, something about a conference in Chicago. I smiled, nodded, played the part, but inside, I was cataloging everything. His stories, his tone, the way he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. He thought I was healing, and I was, just not in the way he assumed. That night, I barely slept. Not because of the pain. I was used to that by now. It was the silence that kept me awake. The quiet realization that the man I trusted, the one who promised forever, had quietly started looking for an exit while I was still fighting to get back on my feet. Every beep of the monitor felt louder, every shadow on the ceiling longer. And in the middle of it all, I made a decision. I wouldn't let this break me. Not twice. I started paying attention differently. Not to my injuries, but to him. What he said, what he didn't. How fast he silenced his phone when it buzzed. I stopped asking questions, stopped hoping. Instead, I started observing, collecting, reclaiming some tiny piece of control with every silent nod. He thought he had time. He thought I was still too broken to see clearly. But he had no idea that clarity is often born from pain. By the end of that week, something in me had shifted. The woman lying in that bed was no longer the one who needed him by her side. I didn't care if he held my hand or brought me soup. I had seen the truth, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. He thought the worst part of my recovery was physical, but the pain in my ribs was nothing compared to the one in my chest. And that pain, that was the one waking me up. I didn't tell anyone, not my family, not the nurses, not even my closest friend who called every night to check in. It wasn't about hiding. It was about preserving something. My strength, maybe. Or my dignity. I let Mark keep playing his part, pretending to be the concerned husband, bringing me magazines and updates from home. But every time he kissed my forehead, I felt it like static. Meaningless. Empty. He had no idea I was already drifting away from him, one quiet breath at a time. In those still hours between medication and physical therapy, I started gathering myself. Not just emotionally, but legally. I messaged a lawyer. Calm, methodical, clinical, the way I imagine people must feel when they start writing their will. She was kind, direct. She told me what I needed to collect, how to protect my privacy, what steps to take. Every screenshot, every chat backup, every email forward felt like armor I was slowly putting on. I wasn't confronting him. Not yet. But I was preparing for a future where I didn't have to see that face lying to me anymore. The nurses started noticing. Not the specifics. They couldn't know what was really happening. But something. They'd say things like, "You look stronger today," or, "There's a light in your eyes again." And they were right. My body was healing, sure. The bruises were fading, the swelling was going down. But that wasn't it. What was really changing was something deeper. A quiet, sharp sense of self I thought I'd lost. I wasn't just recovering. I was remembering who I was before I ever needed someone like him. It's funny how pain can sharpen your vision. I started seeing things with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I'd lie there in that stiff hospital bed, sunlight filtering through the blinds, and think about how far I'd let myself drift. How many times I'd excused the late nights, the cold silences, the missing warmth. I used to call it marriage. Now, I saw it for what it was. Erosion. Slow, silent, and devastating. But here's the thing about erosion. It reveals what's underneath. And I was still here. Every small victory started to matter. I celebrated the way I could finally sit up on my own, or take a few steps without gripping the rail. But the real victories were invisible, like the night I changed all my passwords, or the moment I signed the authorization for my lawyer to move forward. Each click, each step was a quiet declaration. I'm not just healing, I'm reclaiming my identity, my choices, my peace. Mark still came by, though not as often. And when he did, I let him talk. I listened to his rehearsed stories, his phony concern. He didn't know I was already 10 steps ahead, that I'd memorized his patterns, tracked his lies, and set my boundaries without saying a word. I didn't need to scream to be powerful. I just needed to be ready. And with every passing day, I was. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was loaded. There was one evening I remember vividly. A nurse came in to change my bandages, and as she worked, she said, "You're different now, stronger." I didn't say anything at first, but I felt it, deep in my chest. It wasn't about strength like lifting weights or walking laps. It was something quieter. Like I'd stopped asking for someone to save me and started trusting myself to stand. There's a power in stillness, I realized. In waiting, watching, choosing when and how to rise. I began to write again, just notes on my phone at first. Not for anyone else, just for me. Fragments of thoughts, observations, memories I didn't want to lose. Writing made me feel real again. It reminded me that I had a voice, even if I hadn't used it yet. I didn't know where it would lead, or if anyone would ever read a word of it. But it felt like planting something, like hope in soil that had been scorched. By the time the doctors mentioned discharge, I was ready in more ways than one. My body still ached, sure, but the pain no longer ruled me. I had learned how to sit with it, listen to it, and move anyway. I smiled politely when Mark texted, "Can't wait to bring you home," and I replied, "Me too." But what I meant was something else entirely, because every step toward recovery was also a step away from him. The first time I mentioned leaving him out loud, it wasn't to a friend or a lawyer. It was to my therapist, in the middle of a session where we were supposed to be talking about my mobility goals. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "When I leave this hospital, I'm not going back to my husband." She didn't flinch. She just nodded, like she already knew, like she'd been waiting for me to catch up with myself. From that point on, everything felt sharper, more intentional. I wasn't just doing physical therapy to walk again. I was training to walk out. Each stretch, each painful bend, felt like a step toward freedom. The exercises were hard, but they gave me focus. And with every session, I grew more certain. I wasn't going back to the woman who accepted half love. I was walking into a version of myself that didn't beg, didn't settle, didn't shrink. I called my lawyer the same day, told her the timeline. I wanted the divorce papers ready for the day I left the hospital. She paused for a second, just to make sure I meant it, and I did. I wanted precision. No drama, no explosion. Just a clean, undeniable line between who I was and who I was becoming. We set a date. I hung up the phone, and for the first time in weeks, I exhaled like I meant it. I started visualizing it, the moment I'd leave. Not just physically, but emotionally. I pictured myself dressed in something simple but strong. No fanfare, just me, upright, steady, calm. The woman who came in on a stretcher wasn't the one who'd walk out, and that image, it fueled me. Every early morning stretch, every wobbly step down the hallway became a rehearsal. Not for revenge, but for release. I wasn't plotting to hurt him. I was planning to set myself free. There was something empowering about how quiet it all was. No shouting, no ultimatums, no dramatic confrontations. Just emails, signatures, dates. A nurse asked why I always seemed so focused during recovery, like I had somewhere to be. I smiled and said, I do. Because I did. I had a destination, not an address, a state of mind. I wasn't just healing my body. I was cleaning house, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Mark kept texting, more frequently as if he sensed something was off. Do you need anything? Want me to bring your favorite sushi tomorrow? I responded like everything was fine, because that was the plan. Keep him blind. Let him think I was still the version of me that clung to hope. But every word I typed was a countdown. He had no idea that while he was checking off errands, I was crossing off a marriage. The day before discharge, I reviewed everything one last time. The paperwork was perfect. My lawyer had prepared the documents just the way I wanted. No drama, no mess, just truth in black and white. I even chose the envelope myself. Heavy stock, clean, final. I gave it to the head nurse with a quiet instruction. When he arrives tomorrow, please hand this to him before he sees me. She looked at me, curious, then nodded. No questions, just respect. I went to bed early that night, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to wake up ready. I laid there, staring at the ceiling, heart beating slow and steady. There was no fear, no second guessing, just a sense of quiet certainty that this was mine to do, mine to choose, mine to end. The hospital room, once a place of pain and uncertainty, now felt like a launch pad, and tomorrow I would finally rise. He thought I was coming home. That we'd drive away in silence, maybe stop for takeout, pretend nothing had changed. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that 2 deliveries were scheduled that day. One, my medical discharge. The other, his reality check. I woke up before sunrise. There was this strange stillness in the room, like the air itself knew something was ending. I slid out of bed without calling the nurse, slow and careful, testing my balance. My legs were shaky, but they held me. I stood there for a moment, alone, in that ugly hospital gown, and let it sink in. I was upright, I was steady, I was done. Not just with recovery, with pretending, with him. I took my time getting dressed. It wasn't anything fancy, just a soft blouse and jeans I'd asked a friend to bring from home. But I remember how it felt to button each one of those tiny buttons with hands that had once been too weak to hold a spoon. I looked in the mirror and didn't see a victim anymore. I saw someone who'd been cracked open and rebuilt piece by piece. There were scars, sure, but they weren't signs of damage. They were proof I'd survived. By noon, I was at the front desk with my discharge papers in hand, heart calm, face composed. The nurses smiled at me with that mix of pride and quiet awe. They knew, not the details, but the energy. Something had shifted. I thanked them all, hugged the few who had become my anchors, and waited in the lobby, not for him, but for the moment. The moment where the truth would finally meet the lie, and I'd no longer be the one in the hospital bed. I saw his car pull up from the glass doors. Same old gray sedan, same forced urgency in the way he parked. He came in with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, carrying a plastic bag with takeout and a phone in the other hand. He looked around, expecting to see me waiting like always. But instead, the nurse at the front desk stood and handed him an envelope. I watched from my seat, just out of sight, as he took it, confused at first. Then still. He didn't open it right away, just stared at it like it might explode. His shoulders stiffened. The corners of his mouth twitched like he was trying to piece together a different narrative. One where this didn't mean what he already knew it did. And in that silence, I stood up, walked past the automatic doors into the open air. The sun hit my face, and I swear, it felt different. Not warmer, freer. Like I'd just crossed an invisible line I'd been crawling toward for months. I didn't look back, didn't need to. I could feel it, the unraveling, the realization hitting him in waves, that she wasn't coming home, that the woman who once clung to him now walked taller without him. That envelope, it held the truth, my signature, my decision, and the weight of everything he thought I'd never have the strength to do. He stood there holding the end, and I walked into my beginning. I didn't cry. Not then, not later. There was no breakdown, no final plea, no dramatic goodbye, just the sound of the hospital doors closing behind me and the feeling of my own breath, steady, sure, mine. I didn't need a scene. I didn't need closure from him. That envelope had said everything, and for once, I wasn't the one left waiting, wondering, wishing. I was the one who chose, the one who left. I took a cab, not home, but to a small apartment I'd rented with the help of my lawyer. It wasn't much, just a few pieces of furniture, clean sheets, and a quiet I hadn't known in years. But it was mine. Every corner felt like possibility. I stood in the center of that tiny living room and laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt like breathing for the first time. No pretending, no walking on eggshells, just me. I unpacked slowly, one item at a time, like laying bricks in a new foundation. A sweater here, a book there, each one a choice, a declaration. I wasn't escaping. I was arriving. And while Mark was probably still standing in that hospital lobby, stunned and spinning, I had already crossed the threshold into something new, something real. Because walking out of that hospital wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a life no longer built around him. The days that followed felt surreal. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because nothing did. No pleading texts, no surprise visits, just silence. And honestly, it was the most peaceful sound I'd heard in years. My new apartment was small, sure, but it breathed. The windows let in morning light. The kettle whistled. The floor creaked when I walked barefoot. Every detail felt like a quiet promise that life could be soft again. I started building a new rhythm. Slow mornings with hot coffee. A short walk around the block, still careful with my steps. Cooking meals just for me. Not asking anyone what they wanted. Not tiptoeing around someone else's moods. It was strange at first, but it didn't take long before that strangeness turned into freedom. Friends who used to envy my perfect marriage now called to say they admired my courage. Funny how truth always finds its way to the surface. And then one evening, I got a message from a friend who'd been following my recovery journey. "You should tell your story," she said. "It would help people." At first, I brushed it off. I wasn't looking to be anyone's inspiration. But the thought lingered. What if there were women out there just like me, stuck in quiet pain, thinking they had to stay? That night, I opened my laptop, took a deep breath, and hit record. I didn't plan anything fancy. No lighting setup, no perfect script. Just me, sitting at the kitchen table in a soft sweater, with a cup of tea growing cold beside me. I told the truth. Not just the facts, but the feelings. The moments no one sees, like the ache of pretending you're okay, or the way a simple message can gut you. I spoke to the camera like I was speaking to the version of me who had once believed she had no way out. The podcast invited me on the following week. It was a small show about recovery, both physical and emotional. I figured a few people might listen, maybe message me afterward. I didn't expect the wave. Thousands of downloads, emails from strangers. Comments like, "This was my story too," and "You said what I've never been able to say out loud." Turns out when you tell the truth, the real, messy, aching truth, people lean in. The episode went viral, not because it was flashy, but because it was raw, honest, human. Mark found out, of course. Someone forwarded it to him. I'm guessing out of spite or shock, but I didn't hear from him directly. No apology, no denial, just quiet. And that silence, it felt like closure. Not the kind that comes from someone else, but the kind you give yourself when you finally stop waiting for someone to be better than they are. I named the episode "He Left Me in a Bed." I left him in a story. It felt fitting. Because in the end, that's where I left him, in a chapter I no longer needed to reread. I didn't share his name, didn't drag him through the mud. I just told the truth, and somehow, that was enough. The act of telling it, of saying it out loud, closed the door more gently than revenge ever could. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about me, finally choosing myself. People often ask me if I'd take him back if he changed, if he apologized, if he begged. But healing taught me something simple and sharp. Some doors don't need to be reopened. They need to stay closed, sealed with the lessons you earned in silence. I don't hate him. I don't wish him harm. I just don't carry him anymore. And the space where that pain used to live? That's where I planted peace. Now, every time I get a message from a woman saying, "Because of you, I made a move," I smile. Because that means I did more than survive. I transformed. I built something from the wreckage. He lost the woman who would have done anything for him, and I found the woman who finally did something for herself. No second chance, no regrets, just a life I chose, and a story that will never belong to him again.